doubleheader. First in Yankee Stadium, the Royals face the Yankees. Then in Oakland, it's the Tigers and A's. The Yankees and Royals at 12:30 Eastern, followed by the Tigers and A's. Monday on ESPN and on ESPN Radio.
Coming up on the Best of the Paul Finebaum Show podcast, ESPN and ABC analyst John Saunders joins the show as Dan Mullen turned Mississippi State into a high-profile program. Plus, the Sporting News' Matt Hayes ranks SEC head football coaches from 1 to 14, and we take your phone calls. It's the Best of the Finebaum Show podcast, and it starts right now.
This is the Best of the Paul Finebaum podcast.
We talked a lot about Everett Golson here, and someone who had a very strong opinion on that is our next guest, John Saunders, the iconic host at both ABC and ESPN. He's hosted baseball. He's most recently hosted college football, also the host of the Sports Reporters, the program every Sunday morning. And, John, really appreciate your time. I hope all is well, and good afternoon.
Glad to be here, Paul, and I'm not sure all of that stuff you're listing makes me iconic or just old.
Well, I was trying to, we're not too far separate in age, so I'm trying to build you up as much as possible, John.
Well, we can become each other's press secretary if necessary.
Yeah. Well, the main difference is you've had a very distinguished career. I've never played hockey, and you have, so I guess you have the advantage this time of the year talking about that sport. Talk a little bit about your past and when you were a youngster in Canada. How far did you look in terms of your own career and where you wanted to get?
Well, like most young kids growing up in Canada, I was on the ice at 2. Started playing organized hockey at 5, and thought that I would end up playing in the National Hockey League, which my brother actually did. But I came a little short, made it to college, and played at U.S. College at Western Michigan after being recruited to the University of Michigan, and then finished up my career at Ryerson University in Toronto. So I got a good long career, but not as far as I like to say it's all because of injuries, but it's more lack of skill than lack of anything else. So. But it was great, and I still love the sport very much. The best time of year, Stanley Cup playoffs. So it's been great.
It is interesting, and certainly this year maybe more so than others because of the teams involved. But what is your thought on the American public interest in hockey? It certainly in pockets it's large. In other parts of the country, as we all know, it's almost non-existent.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very regionalized sport, but the truth of most sports is that they're regionalized. It's just that some have greater regions than others. College football is a very regionalized sport, but they just have so many regions that are interested in it. And outside of that, you get to the Northeast, and people lose interest in college football. But just the same, there are people who've been transplanted or whatever all around the country who love it. Hockey has just those small pockets in the Northeast and in the Midwest somewhat. It's growing a little bit more. You've got a good team in Alabama. Huntsville is one of the stronger teams in college hockey and such. And California's been producing some players. So it is growing, and its interest is usually surrounded by Olympic years. That makes the interest get that much higher. But it's always great when cities like Chicago and New York and Los Angeles and the bigger cities and the traditional cities have strong teams that go deep into the playoffs like this year.
John, certainly you do a lot of things, and we'll talk about college football in a moment, but I wanted to ask you about hosting the Sports Reporter. Certainly the great Dick Schaap hosted that show for many, many years, and he passed away, and you moved in. Talk about that. Obviously not easy. Replacing or succeeding someone like that, but it's gone quite well. What is that show like to be the host of?
Well, it's a show that I never aspired to, nor did I think I would get anywhere near, really. Dick Schaap, legend, and nobody will ever approach his heights and what he brought to that show, and the incredible writer that he was, and amazing television presence. There's no way anybody can ever top that, and I'll be the first one to admit that. And they just asked me to come in for a week, actually, when Dick was going in for some surgery, and I really thought I would be in there the one time, and actually the first time I was on, I didn't really enjoy it very much. The guys who were there that day did not take to me coming to their show. They didn't think I was one of them. And so it was a little bit difficult that first day. And when they asked me a week later if I could come back because Dick wasn't out of the hospital yet, I actually was unable to do it and thought that would be the end of it. But the following week after that, Dick was still in the hospital, so they brought me back, and unfortunately, Dick never recovered. And that December passed away. And then there was, obviously some incredibly sad times, and the gentleman on the show reminiscing about Dick and such. And there was some question as to who would replace him. And when they decided to go with me, it was just an honor that I could not turn aside. And it's been one of the greatest honors I've ever gotten in sports television, and it's been one of the most fun shows I've ever done. And I just love being part of it. It's a very smart program. The guys that are on there have different takes and different attitudes and different interests in sports and outside of sports, and so it's really a fun show to work on. I love it. And Sunday morning, it's an institution at ESPN, so to be part of that, there's nothing better than that.
Now, John, as a recovering sports writer of 25 years, I just chuckled at the thought of a new person coming in because that is not that cannot be. Sometimes that is a very difficult group to crack into, and you've done a great job. And you had a pretty strong comment a week or so ago about Everett Golson at the end of the show, and certainly he is in the news, graduated Notre Dame. We don't know when he will announce. Supposed to be soon, although we're getting reports now that it may not be tomorrow. Your thoughts on the way this is being played out, both by him and elsewhere?
Well, what captured my interest in it is it's one of those stories. And the way I wrote it was as if I was leading up to some sort of a tragedy, because it's one of those stories that plays out early as if it was going to be a sad ending to it. The guy basically gets kicked out of Notre Dame for a year for allegedly cheating. I don't think anybody actually found out exactly what he had done wrong, but that's what we had heard. And so it could have played out very interestingly, never coming back to Notre Dame, and suddenly winding up in some Division III school or something and never making it to the National Football League, and his dreams are crushed. Or even coming back to Notre Dame and losing the job and having to transfer elsewhere and never graduating again and being drafted in the 7th round of the NFL and never becoming a star. So, I thought that the fact that he had graduated from Notre Dame made this incredibly interesting, because he could leave, number one, and play right away, not have to sit out a year while waiting to get his grades up or waiting to become eligible. He could transfer into these current roles and play right away, and on top of that, walk away with a degree, so that if the NFL future doesn't happen, he's got a Notre Dame degree, which is about as good as it gets. So the fact that it played out the way it did, I thought, was a testament to the young man, because he certainly could have sulked the way things went earlier, and he could have easily gone the other way. So the fact that he buckled down with the books and hit them hard and was able to graduate and still have eligibility left over that he can take somewhere else and take it to a program that would love to have him. Who wouldn't love to have a quarterback that's already played in national championship games? So I thought it just made a tremendous story and a great example for other kids out there.
Chatting with John Saunders, made strong comments on Everett Golson. Wasn't too long ago you made strong comments on Mayweather, Pacquiao. For the guy who's hosting the show, you've drawn a few headlines lately. I don't know if I doubt that's your intent. You're just giving an opinion. But your comments on Mayweather drew a lot of attention. Talk a little bit about that.
My opinions are generally come out during the show if you know me, because they're generally pretty subtle. But I thought with the Pacquiao-Mayweather situation, it just seemed hypocritical of all of us somewhat, and the sports public in general, to be celebrating this guy and to be building up this fight and to be putting millions and millions of dollars in his pocket with the background of domestic violence that he has, especially coming on the heels of what we had done to NFL players who had been involved in domestic violence situations, where we were taking money out of their pockets, taking their careers away or sitting them down for a season or shorter, half a season or whatever. In different cases, Ray Rice still has not been able to find employment. So essentially, he's lost millions of dollars, and through no fault of his own. I'm in no way excusing him for what he did. It's through no fault of his own that he's lost his career. But the fact remains that he's lost millions. Well, Mayweather was sitting up to take in, and it looks like he'll take in about $200 million for this fight, and much more if there's a rematch. So it just seemed incredibly hypocritical of all of us to be trumpeting this guy and setting up the fight and talking about it and celebrating him. So I just thought it necessary just to give my opinion, which was I won't pay for it and I won't watch it. And wasn't telling anybody else what they should do, but I just knew I wasn't going to do it, and I felt I couldn't be a hypocrite.
John, really appreciate your time. It's a great pleasure to visit with you. I think you're iconic. I think most people agree. I'm glad you were able to spend some time with us today.
Paul, thanks for having me on. First time for me, and long-time listener, though. So
well, thank
I know how it goes.
You're doubly iconic now. Thank you so much. Great to talk to you.
Thanks.
Wow.
This is the best of the Paul Finebaum podcast.
Certainly interesting conversation there from John on Everett Golson, Braxton Miller. These have been two of the bigger stories of the spring. Gentlemen, I don't know why I keep using that word, but I'll keep it until I'm told not to. Your thoughts on both? They've drawn enormous attention. I'm not sure why.
It's unbelievable, and I told you to be careful throwing that word around when you toss it in here. You might catch us at a bad time. As far as Everett Golson, I've been following this story because I think he can make an impact on a Power 5 team, depending on offense, maybe winning a game on the road that team wouldn't have because of his experience playing in a big-time program, playing down there in Tallahassee in what was one of the craziest atmospheres last year against Florida State. So in that sense, that's why I'm following the story. At this point, though, it's drug out a little too much for me.
Yeah, it's actually two polar opposite comparisons here. You have Braxton Miller, who there's been rumors of it, but we don't know. He hasn't come out and said, yes, I'm transferring, or there hasn't been anybody saying, hey, sources told me it's this school, it's that school. We've heard a little bit here and there, but it's been pretty quiet. Everett is on this tour, and he's negotiating with Jimbo Fisher.
Why don't we just get T-shirts made, like the Everett Golson Spring Tour, Summer Tour,
really is.
2015. You go to a concert, you get the tour dates on the back, what stop he's going to. That's basically what it is. And I don't know Everett Golson. I haven't talked to anybody in his camp, so I'm not just going to sit here and say, oh, look at all this self-promotion. But that's what it feels like.
It definitely feels like that.
You will get no argument from me. I don't like it at all. And certainly John has an opinion, and I respect his opinion. I disagree with it. I'm turned off by it. I mean, Braxton Miller, to his credit, we haven't heard anything from him. We haven't seen him, and it's very likely that he won't go anywhere, that according to the latest reports. Everett Golson might as well go on The View and open it up for bids. I mean, he's just not that great. I realize he could help a Power 5 team, as John said, but I've watched this guy play a number of times. I'm not impressed. He's had some really good games and some really bad games, and the fact that it's almost June and he's going to show up tells me that this is all about him and really nobody else.
This is the best of the Paul Finebaum podcast.
These are the top 14 coaches in the SEC. There are only 14 in case you're lost track at home. According to Matt Hayes of the Sporting News, Saban, Spurrier, I don't think you'd get a lot of argument about those two coaches with 5 national titles between them. But after that, a lot of debate. Guys, what strikes you the most from that list?
For me, it's Malzahn being at 6. A guy who won a national championship should probably be a little higher.
It's tough. I've been thinking a lot about Gus Malzahn lately, and being able to take Auburn to the national championship game, impressive. But the way they got there, a lot of breaks went their way. And you follow that with an 8-5 season. As a matter of fact, if I were to rank coaches, and you look at this list, Mullen's too far down, the margin between number 4 and number 10 is so different. It's unbelievable. But as far as Malzahn, Paul, if I'm going to rank a coach that has a lot to prove this year, isn't it him? I mean, he's a genius. He's going to change the SEC. He's going to change the way offenses run in college football, and we're not there anymore, are we? Another 8-5, 9-4.
Well, you know, he is given credit for what Auburn did in 2010 when Gene Chizik was the coach. So I agree. I think he is someone I'm watching closely this year, as you are and many others are. I mean, he will either be the favorite or the second pick in the SEC. And I understand the circumstances of 8-5, but if this season doesn't live up, then some will wonder. Bielema III struck me, very good coach, but I would probably, and I haven't laid this out, go with Pinkel in that position. I think he has shown that he is one of the best coaches, not only in the SEC, but in the country. And I think Rick at 8 is a little bit low. After that, I've done this many times in the past, and it's extremely difficult once you get in the middle of the list. I don't think the back end of this is very difficult. The bottom 3 are pretty easy. After that, it's a real challenge.
This is the best of the Paul Finebaum podcast.
Greg Osendorf joins us from ESPN. He has alluded to this list in a conversation and a column on Dan Mullen at number 11 after an iconic season of really say whatever you want about the end of it for Mississippi State. It ended badly, but to be number 1 for about half the season showed that Mississippi State football has to be taken seriously, and the return of Dak Prescott. Greg, thanks for the time. I know that's certainly something you have been involved with. How do you possibly rank Dan Mullen that low? Not you, but how does someone else?
I agree with you. I think that what he's been able to do at Mississippi State and just what he's accomplished at a school that 10 years ago was the laughingstock of the SEC, and now they're a team that routinely competes for bowl games, and now they're in the mix maybe. And again, I said a couple weeks ago on your show that I think they may take a step back this year, but the way they're recruiting with their name becoming more of a national name, I think you're going to see better recruits coming in, and the way they develop players too, they're going to be back up top, maybe not number 1, but in that conversation for the West every year in a year or two, if not this coming year. And so I think it's amazing. I'm a little surprised he hasn't taken a job somewhere else yet, to be honest with you, but he seems to be at State right now for the long haul, and he's happy where he's at in Starkville.
Yeah, Greg, and you mentioned Dan Mullen. Certainly he has been a coach that's been linked to other jobs. He was linked to the Michigan job. Obviously, Jim Harbaugh was the number 1 choice, but if Harbaugh had backed out at the last minute, if that ugly ending in San Francisco had not gone down, do you think Dan Mullen was pretty close to being the next choice?
I think he was in that mix. And I think that, he wouldn't tell you this, but I think that he'd have a hard time saying no to that job. Just because, again, I wrote the story about how Mississippi State is now a higher profile program, but it's not Michigan. And I don't know that it'll ever be Michigan. And so for him to have that opportunity and go to a school like Michigan or like a Florida, which opened up, and I know he and Foley, the AD, have some issues there, but one of those schools, I think there's a ceiling at Mississippi State, and that ceiling's a lot higher at Michigan or Florida, and I think he would have had a hard time turning those jobs down. And he may, especially with what he's done at State, I think he could have been really successful at one of those 2 schools, and I wouldn't be surprised down the road if he does land another bigger job at some point.
We'll talk about what he has accomplished there and what he's been up against, because this isn't someone who has had in the past Nick Saban-like recruiting classes. What's the short and long on Dan Mullen being able to turn good recruits into great ones?
No, it was well documented last year that he took a team primarily full of 2- and 3-star guys, and like you said, had that number 1 in the country, and really until the Egg Bowl and that loss, they were in that conversation for the playoff. I think they were at number 4, and most people thought that the schools might jump them, but still they were in that conversation for a long time. And they didn't have 5-star guys. They don't recruit like Alabama does, and they're starting to. They're starting to get players. We saw this past class, guys like Leo Lewis and Jamal Peters, who can both be instant impact guys. But when I talked to Dan Mullen last week, he said that I don't look at how many stars they have when I offer them. If he said if it's a 4 or 5-star guy, great, that's great for the fans. But he'll just as easily sign a 2-star guy. And you look at the last year's team. Bernard McKinney was a 2-star guy. Josh Robinson, a 2-star guy. Preston Smith, a 3-star guy. All three of those guys got drafted. And so clearly that staff knows how to develop talent. He knows how to evaluate talent. And so he's doing something right. And now you add those guys along with some of these bigger name, higher profile players. I think, again, he's got a good foundation now. He just needs to build on it.
Certainly, though it was a disappointing end. I mean, when you lose the Egg Bowl and you lose badly in the bowl game, how are they dealing with that in Starkville?
I think there's still optimism. I think you're right. I think that some people don't take them as seriously because of the way they finish the season, and especially that loss to Georgia Tech. But to me, the bowl games it's hard to really take those seriously. Not that, they're obviously big games, but a lot of SEC teams lost. And let's say Mississippi State plays Georgia Tech in October. Is it the same result? I don't know. I just think there's a lot of, it depends on who's more motivated, and everybody comes in more motivated to play the SEC, and that's one of the things going against the SEC in bowl games. But still, it was definitely a disappointing finish for Mississippi State. And I think, though, with Dak Prescott back, they have a guy who's a program changer and who will be a Heisman candidate. And Mullen mentioned this. Who's the last Heisman candidate before the season to play for Mississippi State? And I don't remember one, to be honest. And so they have a guy now this year in Prescott who will be in that conversation from week one. And if they can win 9, 10, 11 games, I think he'll stay in that conversation until the end of the season as long as he stays healthy. And, again, that just hasn't happened at Mississippi State recently, or if ever.
Coming off a big year, certainly 10-3, the number one ranking. You mentioned maybe a step back even with Dak Prescott. What's the range? What are we looking at this year with the Bulldogs?
It depends. I don't have the schedule in front of me, but you know how difficult the West can be in the SEC in general. And I think more realistically, you're looking at 8-9 wins and kind of what they've done the years before last year. I don't know that they can get back to where they were last year, the number one ranking again. They lost a lot of players. I know Prescott's back, but they lost a lot of good players from last year. I mentioned a couple in Robinson, Preston Smith, and McKinney. But there's the offensive line is a big question mark going in this year. They lost 3 or 4 starters off that unit, and the problem is when you don't recruit these 5-star guys, you don't always have somebody ready to step in and fill that role, and it may take a year or two to develop your left tackle or whatever position it may be. And I think that's what is they're up against Mississippi State right now, and that's why I think you got to lower the expectations just a touch this year. I still think they're definitely a bowl team, and with Prescott, they could be even better than that. Again, 8-9 wins, but I don't know that they're a 10, 11, 12-win team this year.
Well, certainly the two biggest games, actually three of the biggest games, LSU and obviously Alabama and Ole Miss are all at home. That really matters. There's some tough road games. Let's not kid ourselves, including one at Auburn. But in regard to Dan Mullen and trying to deal with not only everyone else in the SEC, he has to deal with Hugh Freeze and Ole Miss. Talk about that rivalry and where we are right now. I know Ole Miss won the last one, but it's still pretty intense.
It's amazing to me that it's the same year Mississippi State makes their run at the number one spot, and it's maybe for the first time in I don't know how long, Ole Miss has a breakout season too, and so they've been on the same plane the last 2 or 3 years, and they're turning in that same direction. And I think that again they're very even this year. I would give a small edge to Ole Miss just because of some of the talent they have there and some of the NFL talent really they have on campus right now. But again, they're both programs on the rise and really had that breakthrough season that a lot of teams have been looking for. And right now, you wonder, can they sustain that success? Can they stay on top? And I think Ole Miss has a better chance to do so this year. But what Mullen and Freeze, and that's why in the offseason they both got $4 million contracts because those ADs know they want to keep those two around. And this Egg Bowl rivalry it's not the Iron Bowl, but it's getting closer and closer, and it's one that has become more of a national rivalry than it has been in years past.
Greg, we're still a little bit a month and change before the SEC media days in Alabama, and most of us can't quite figure out where the media will land, either Auburn or Alabama, to win the SEC. What's your take?
It's the same way every year with that rivalry too. But right now, I like to lean towards Auburn just a little bit, and I think because mostly because of the quarterback position. And with a guy like Jeremy Johnson, who he doesn't have the experience that he's not a starter from last year, returning starter, but he played some last year. We know what to expect from him. I think everybody expects him to be talented. He's got Duke Williams, the wide receiver. I think that offense will be just fine with him under center. And in Alabama, there's just a lot of question marks. Who's going to be that guy? And we never know. Nick Marshall, nobody knew his name 2 years ago either, and he went on to lead Auburn to the SEC championship game. So Alabama could still find that player at quarterback, but right now they don't have that player. And with all the off-season trouble and some of the arrests and the injuries and whatnot, I think there's just a lot of uncertainty in Tuscaloosa right now, and not so much at Auburn. And I also think Auburn gets a jolt with Will Muschamp, the defensive coordinator. So, again, they're both top 10 teams to me. I would give a small edge to Auburn, and also don't forget the Iron Bowl is in Auburn this year, which is a nice list too.
If you had to pick a team outside of the state of Alabama, that leaves you a number of possibilities. Who's the next best, regardless of division?
I think it has to be Georgia, and I know we talked again recently on your show about who's the favorite in the East, and I mentioned Georgia. And I just think that, again, they're having some quarterback issues too. They don't know who their guy is. I like Bryce Ramsey, but I don't know for sure who's going to win that job. But you have Nick Chubb, arguably the most talented player in the conference and probably the best running back. And I just like that defense. I like what Jeremy Pruitt's done in his time in Georgia. Their outside linebackers, Lorenzo Carter, Leonard Floyd, a lot of good pass rushers. The secondary is improved. I just think they have a really good defense that will keep them in a lot of games and force turnovers. And then, again, you saw last year, if you just hand the ball to Nick Chubb, you can score a lot of points and win a lot of games that way too. So I think Georgia right now, especially playing in the East, they may not be quite as talented. I think A&M's a team to watch, but going through that Western division is going to be difficult for the Aggies and for everybody else in that division. And so right now, I think Georgia might be the next best team after Alabama and Auburn.
Greg, many thanks for the time. It's always great to catch up. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on again.
This is the best of the Paul Finebaum podcast.
Geico presents Strange Savings Stories. Astronomers detected an interstellar transmission. It stated, Geico, 15 minutes could save you 15% or more. The implications were staggering. Was the cosmos telling us we could all save hundreds on car insurance with Geico? Or did their radar merely pick up a signal from the nearby Rufus and Clyde's morning show? We may never know.
Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance.
This is the best of the Paul Finebaum podcast.
Mike in Arkansas next up. Hey, Mike.
Hey, Paul. How are you doing?
Very well. Thank you for the call.
This is my second time calling. I love the show. I just wanted to talk about the Hogs a little bit with you.
You bet.
And why I think that people might be surprised by them this year. Brandon Allen, you talk about all these other quarterbacks in the SEC. He's got the highest QBR in the SEC right now. And he's grown a lot from last year, especially this spring. And I think Enos's new offense fits better with Bielema. And the new junior college wide receiver that they brought in and our solid one with Keon Hatcher, I think that our passing game will open up a little bit more. Maybe not long downfield bombs, but, it'll open it up more than those just short slants, 15-yard, 10-yard dumps. With backfield, man, we got our running back studs, our tight ends with Hunter Henry and Jeremy Sprinkle. And, it's going to be a more balanced game this year. And with the Hogs' offensive line, I think that'll make it all happen. The linebackers are a question right now. And I think that if our linebackers step up this year, after our loss of a couple last year, we're going to be a really big team to, contend with. I think teams better respect the Hogs this year, the way Bielema.
Well, listen, let me jump in here, Mike. Thanks for the call. I think people do respect Brett Bielema. They also know how difficult it was to finally get over the hump. I think Arkansas has a really great opportunity, but the schedule is always your friend and your enemy, and that early game against Tennessee, I think, will decide a lot for both programs. Thank you very much for the call. David is next up in South Carolina. Hey, David.
Hey, Paul. How you doing? Thanks for taking the call.
Thank you.
You're the best, man.
Thank you.
Paul, I'd like to make a comment, then I'd like to ask you a question. I'll hang up and listen to your response. Earlier in your show, a guy from Louisiana, he wasn't too impressed with Les Miles being able to win with his players. Well, I'm a big South Carolina fan, and that's one of the many things I admire about Steve Spurrier. You know, we all know his career at Kentucky, Florida, and South Carolina. When he went to those schools, they were down on the bottom looking up. And while we've never won a national championship in Columbia, he has made us relevant, he has made us a lot better, and he has brought us in a lot better players. So, you know, who knows? We might be holding that trophy one day. But the question I wanted to ask you is about Alabama. As great a team as they are, and they have the #1 recruiting class every year, why are they in need of a quarterback? I don't understand it. They should have 2 or 3 lined up ready to play. I would like your response, and I'll hang up, and thanks for taking my call, and go Gamecocks.
Thank you. David, I agree with you. At this point in time, and I know they have some incoming, but every year you hear that. Alabama is high on this guy, and it hasn't seemed to work out very well. I'll spare you the quarterback is the toughest position to project on the roster, but when you recruit like Alabama, you shouldn't ever be in this position. They are, though. Ryan is next up in Johnson City, Tennessee. How are you, Ryan?
Doing well. How you doing, Paul?
Oh, well. Thanks a lot.
Good. Yeah, just real quick, I have a quick comment on Tennessee. I know there was a caller earlier, I think his name was Tim from Tennessee, that, you know, had some pretty large expectations for Tennessee football, to say the least. And I just think that, and there's pockets of that everywhere in Tennessee, and I'm not the kind of person that's ever going to tell anybody to not be hype on their team, but for us Tennessee fans, I think we do need to be careful to, you know, not put so much extreme expectations on this team. You know, obviously they're still very young. But at the same time also it's kind of a slippery slope because, you know, you want us to enjoy the moment. You want us to be in the, you know, the hype. You know what I mean? And I think that, you know, if we look at the schedule, you know, a 9-3 season, I would take that any day of the week, you know, this year. I'd just like to get your response on that. And as far as the hype is concerned, you know, should we, you know, relish in it or should we, you know, hold the horses on it?
Well, I think when you've been as bad as Tennessee has for as long, thanks for the call, for as long as Tennessee has, then I would relish the excitement. And I think that's what Butch Jones is doing right now. He's embracing the expectations. He's cautioning we're not there yet. And I don't think they are. What is a good season at Tennessee, I think, becomes the issue. I mean, to me, the midpoint would be 8-4. I think that's the target. Hoping, if you're a Tennessee fan, you can turn one game, maybe two, and go 10-2. You don't want to go any lower than 8-4 because then it really isn't considered much progress. So I think that's where Tennessee fans are. I think most are realistic. They're unrealistic fans from every fan base who always think their team will win it all. Doesn't work that way. Appreciate the call. Bill is in California, and you are next up. Hey, Bill.
Is it me, Paul?
Yes, sir, Bill. Go right ahead. Thank you for the call.
All right. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to listen to and say, welcome to Quarterback U. That's in Starkville. You know, that's that Dan Mullen's guy. It's taken him 6 years to get there, but everybody else is struggling for one, and he's got a second-string quarterback that can start for LSU right now. I was at the spring game. I saw him. And I know we have unreasonable expectations around the plate, but I would say there's a reason why Dan Mullen is not leaving Starkville, Mississippi, for all those who've never been there. And the reason is it's a place to raise a family. He's got young children. Would he want to take those children to Gainesville or to Notre Dame or to State College? The answer is no, because he's got a young family. He's got a great place, and I want to put my shout-outs for Dan Mullen. Maybe he's number 11 by some people. That's fine. He's good for us. I don't mind him at all. I hope he stays as long as he can breathe a deep breath. And in terms of, you know, in player development, everything else, he's taking it. There's nothing changing. There's going to be players coming out on his team this year that nobody's heard of. And that even what's the guy from Arkansas saying, I like the way Mississippi State did that 1A and 1B defense. I'm going to do the same thing because I got that many players. He's somebody to emulate. He's got a style, a coaching style that it's basic. It's 101. And having said that, I just say to you, Paul, as a basketball aficionado, as I know you are, you just wait till this Mr. Ben Howland gets through with Mississippi State basketball this year. There's no dominant team in the SEC coming up that you can go like, oh, my gosh, they're heads above everybody else. Because they're not. That's what's wide open. And the new little player that he signed, the little number one point guard in the country program, that says they're going to do their thing. I'm disappointed about baseball, but we'll fix that. But at the same time, I'm back to Dan Mullen. He's the real deal. And wherever he lands up, whether he stays with Mississippi State or not, is not going to change. He does player development. He's about recruiting people, not positions. And he will prove himself, and you'll see new players. And I would only say to you in closing, y'all keep on voting on them boys from Oxford up there, that school up north, and tell them how great they are, because they'll fall flat on their face like they always have. They ain't won a SEC championship since 1963.
Thank you, Bill. Always good to hear from a good Mississippi State fan of Venice Beach. William is up next in Tennessee. How are you, William?
Hey, Paul, how are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Hey, good. Well, first of all, I want to address the last caller. First of all, I was down in Starkville a couple of years ago for the unfortunate loss in the Egg Bowl. But the best thing about Starkville is a sign that tells you how many miles you have to get to Oxford. And secondly, I'd like to say, address another caller you had on your show earlier named Becky, who claimed to be an Ole Miss fan, but couldn't add 9 and 3 together. And I just want to address that was clearly a State fan as well, trying to pretend like one of us, because not only does Ole Miss have the best-looking girls, but our girls can add 9 and 3 together, and their voices aren't that deep. But realistically, I think the Rebels can expect about 9 wins, give or take 1 during the regular season. We've lost 3 major defensive players in Shackelford, Pruitt, and Golson. We have replacements for all of them. We have Chad Kelly coming in at the quarterback position. And I think we're going to do a great job.
Thank you. I tell you what, I was in Oxford last weekend, as some of you know, and I am really becoming a fan of this bitter hatred between Ole Miss and Mississippi State. I thought I'd seen it all living in Alabama for many, many years, but I'm really anticipating much more fun between these two fan bases.
This is the best of the Paul Finebaum podcast.
I will agree with Greg. The Auburn-Alabama rivalry is the standard bearer, but Ole Miss and Mississippi State is getting very, very ugly. And that's good. To some people, it's bad for others, but it will create a lot of excitement. But I will say finally, and I know I'm opining now like a politician, but last year I felt, having I had 3 different trips to the Magnolia State, that fans of both were pretty happy with the other guy getting attention. There wasn't that normal bitterness I've seen in some states. People embraced it because it made the state better and it made the football prowess of the state even more important. Darrell is up next in Georgia.
Well, let me ask you this. Well, first of all, what's going on, Paul? How you doing?
Good? I'm doing great.
Good. What's the ugliest rivalry in the SEC?
That would. I mean, there are a couple of them. I mean, you have the.
No, I mean ugly. I mean hate.
Auburn and Georgia has gotten ugly. Florida and Georgia is pretty ugly.
I would say Florida and Georgia are by far above. I mean, you don't see Auburn and Alabama fighting. I mean, Florida, Rick and all the players out in the end zone jump up and down. I mean, there's been eyeballs poked out. There's been people bit, people kicked, people stomped on. That is just a ugly, 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 brutal hate rivalry. And I wouldn't, you know what? I wouldn't have it any other way. One thing I would do is I'd move it out of friggin' Jacksonville. That's not a neutral site by no means. I wish it would go. I wish they would change it and it would go home, in Athens one year and then Gainesville one year and go back and forth that way. Hey, Who came out with that list that you read off about the coaches?
That was Matt Hayes from the Sporting News.
I mean, I don't comprehend him putting Mullen as low as he did, and I surely don't comprehend him putting Mark Richt at number 8. I mean, give me a friggin' break. I mean, I do not. What was he basing it off of? His opinion?
Well, that's what anyone would base a list off of, Daryl. You come up with a list of the top coaches in the SEC.
Okay. Let me ask you this.
Mm-hmm.
I ain't gonna ask you to name me your list, but if you did name me your list, would Mark Richt be number 8? No,
Mark Richt would be easily in the top 4 or 5.
I would agree. Now that's more logical there. That's what I just don't understand. That's when I asked what was he basing off of. I mean, he had to be more in his opinion, unless he just. I was thinking he works for ESPN. He's got to have some sense. You know what? I don't know about you, but I hear all these people talking about the division titles and we won the division. I'm calling you old school if you want. To me, the division title means absolutely nothing. I guess we need to go back into history now, the SEC, and every team that finished second, we need to give them credit. I mean, the only thing that matters and will always matter is who wins the conference. That is, I know. I think we put you get too much credit for winning the division, which means nothing. Here's why: if you win the division, you don't win the conference. Then it really don't matter you won the division.
Yeah, but Daryl, it's become kind of the game within the game, and you can look at Missouri, get enormous mileage out of winning the division, even though in Missouri's case they were nowhere close in either championship game.
Exactly. You know what? And I can get enormous pride out of them winning the division, and we stomping them in their own backyard 34-0. That's why winning the division don't mean anything to me. I mean, it carries very low. The only thing that's good about the division, you got to win it to get to the conference championship. But other than that, I mean, it don't carry as much weight as people make it out to be. One last thing, John pointed out on Friday, he asked, why does Georgia always seem to lose a big game? You know what? I thought about that, and I went and did a little research. My opinion, you look at Ohio State's upcoming season this year, right now, they have one big game on that schedule, Michigan State. That's it. One. You look at Georgia, we got 7. 7 compared to 1, you're bound to maybe lose a big game. And I think, I'm not going to give Ohio State, I ain't going to say Penn State's a big game. Would you say Penn State's a big game? I'm asking.
Big. Yeah.
I don't know. But anyway, that's just all I wanted to say. But that list, that guy, Matt Hayes, I'm going to have to look now. Matt Hayes got a Twitter account, Paul?
Yes, he does.
I will be looking him up. See you, Paul.
Good deal. Thanks. Corey is in Corey is in Missouri, and you are next. Hey, Corey.
Hey, Paul. What's going on?
Really well.
I just want to say Daryl he's a little sore about the whole Missouri-Georgia thing. I think he's just a little jealous. But to get back to the whole point, my question was, what do you think of Harold Brantley's chances are to win Defensive SEC Player of the Year, and what do you think Matty Mock has a chance to do this year, as in do you think he'll be in the upper echelon of SEC quarterbacks?
Yeah, I think the answer is high for both, and frankly, Missouri has owned lately that Defensive Player of the Year. Though, let me go back to the Georgia question, though, and Georgia has gained an unfortunate reputation for losing one game every year by a big number, and that's really been the Achilles heel of Mark Richt. It just seems like it's not only a big game, but it's a big loss. It's a bad loss, and I think that has really hurt the program quite a bit from a perception standpoint. Jordan is up next. Hey, Jordan.
Hey, Paul. What's going on, man?
We're doing well. Thank you for the call.
Good, man. Good. I was just wondering, why is there such a big hype going on with Everett Golson? He's transferring right now. I know schools that he was looking at was Florida State, Georgia, Alabama, and Florida. And he was supposed to announce where he was transferring to today, but evidently he's postponed it again. I just don't understand why teams would want Everett Golson. I mean, he turns the ball over more than I've ever seen anybody in NCAA do.
Jordan, a couple of things. First of all, it's the time of the year when there is a dearth of college football news. I mean, there's just nothing going on right now. No one, everyone's shut down. The summer is upon us, so you don't really hear much other than scheduling, and maybe this game has been slated for television. Secondly, I just think it's become the new normal where programs really go after someone, not so much because I think they really want him, because they're afraid someone else will get him. I wouldn't want Everett Golson, frankly. I thought Miller offered a little bit at the time, and it's all about timing. Why do you want a quarterback to show up now? You want him before spring practice. You at least want him on campus where he can observe. It's way too late now. I mean, the summer's here, and camps are going to be opening not too far in the distant future.
This is the best of the Paul Finebaum podcast.
Let's check in with Selena, who is in Ohio. Hey, Selena, good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you. How are you doing today?
Well, thank you very much.
I just wanted to bring up a couple of things. First off, Lady Vols softball team continued its legacy of excellence and are headed to the Super Regionals this week, where hopefully we will stomp all over Florida State. That'll be fun. So it seems like a good time to me to discuss the University of Tennessee's intent to rebrand the Lady Vols. Now, I had problems with this from the beginning because they originally stated that they were going to rebrand all the women's athletics programs except for the basketball team because of its associations with Pat Summitt and her legacy. But then this weekend, some of the University of Tennessee released some emails that had gone between it and Nike regarding this rebranding, and one of the things that was said by Nike was, and I quote, "Because your brand has an emotional connection with your students, staff, and alumni, it is critical to keep the development of the work confidential and on a need-to-know basis." So I have a couple of questions about this. First off, why is it that if they're wanting to make Tennessee a one Tennessee branding, and Nike has said that multiple brands are inconsistent with UT's stated objective of having one brand, excluding women's basketball, why is it that, A, other women's athletic programs aren't deemed worthy enough of the Lady Vols logo, and B, how is it that an athletic company can tell a state-funded university that anything regarding their branding is on a need-to-know basis for its alumni and students?
Well, it's a good question. Listen, I have followed that from a distance. I don't know the details about why this is going down the road it's going. I mean, like everyone, I like the Lady Vols brand. I thought it spoke about Pat and everything else at the school. You know, Tennessee was one of, I think it may have been the first school in the SEC to have separate athletic departments. That goes as far back as I can remember. I'm not 100% certain where that is right now. Do you know?
Well, I know the Lady Vols brand has been around for about 40 years. Yeah. 38, I think, is the exact number. I'm not sure, but I believe you're right. I believe it was the first separately designated women's athletic department. What bothers me about this is, sure, the Lady Vols brand was probably best built by the women's basketball program and Coach Summitt. I think we can all agree on that. But we have other women's sports now, like our softball team, that have been performing with excellence for a long time. And removing that Lady Vols brand is an insult to our softball players, our volleyball teams, you know, our swim teams, whatever, going back over the past 4 decades. And if they were really serious about creating this one Tennessee branding, then why would they exclude women's basketball from that? It just seems to me that both from the university and from Nike, everything they say is kind of contradicting everything else. And the fact that Nike specifically said that it needed to be on a need-to-know basis for students, staff, and alumni, it just feels really ugly to me, you know.
Well, Selena, you're not the only one. I have friends that live there, and they don't like it either. I wish I could help you more. Maybe next week when we are in Destin, we could visit with Dave Hart, the athletic director, and maybe even the president down there and get their views and see where it is. But thank you very much for the call. Rick is in California. Hey, Rick, thank you. Good afternoon.
Greetings, Paul, from Southern California. And you know, I'm not being sarcastic when I say this. I didn't know anything about that, and I really don't have any dog in the hunt at all, but that does sound ridiculous. You know, I mean, I can see where she's being a ball fan and a Lady Vol fan that she would have some concerns there.
No, it's a big story.
Yeah, something needs to be done about it. That's ridiculous. I'm all the way out here in California, so you don't hear too much, but I can see where I can see where that could be concerned with the fans. But getting to the Alabama quarterback question, you had a caller a little while ago, and this is my opinion on that. And I think a lot of it started back with Phillip Sims and McElroy. You had two guys that I believe both were five-star guys, and they're brought in, and literally from the day they get on campus, they're almost an afterthought. And because of the way Alabama plays football and has for several years, the quarterback, if you always hear the game manager type thing, well, these guys, they hear that from your NFL analysts at the on draft day. What's it? Forget the guy's name with the hair, but anyway, they all they hear about is a guy came from Alabama, so he's not really sought after or anything like that. And these recruits that are 4- and 5-star guys are hearing this, and they know that they're not going to get the opportunity to really show their wares when they go to Alabama. So I think that hinders Alabama in the quarterback hunts. But hopefully Blake Barnett is going to change.
Yeah, he's one of those heavily recruited players Alabama's signed in a very long time.
Yeah, and one of the very, very few since I think Sims was like one of the highest guys in.
Yeah, by the way, McElroy though Sims was highly regarded. McElroy originally committed to Texas Tech.
Correct. Correct.
He was. Everyone thought Tebow was going to Alabama, and that is serious.
Yes,
that's not a. Yeah. And when after Tebow announced for Florida, Mike Shula went back in and was able to turn McElroy around, but he was not that heavily recruited.
Well, I mean, but he was an undefeated quarterback. But
he was not he was not your quintessential 5-star recruit. Is my point.
No, but I do remember him as being a 4- or 5-star guy. But like you just said, that all changed when Tebow made his announcement. But that's my opinion on it. I just don't think that the guys coming in the Alabama quarterback, when they start to go out and recruit, it's very difficult for them to try to say, hey, you guys, you're going to be a highlight of our program. They just don't get that kind of guy anymore. And I think Barnett may change that. On another note, just real quick, since everybody's making their opinion, I'm thinking Georgia's going to win the SEC, and this is why. They don't play the gauntlet in the West. I know they always drop that one game, but even if they do drop the one game during the season,
well, what do you mean they don't, Rick? They don't play. I mean, they play the two best teams in the West.
Well, they have Auburn. Oh, they do have Alabama this year. I stand corrected. I apologize for that. But I think that with Chubb, with that defense that they've got coming back, I'm not a Georgia fan. I'm a Bama fan. But I do think that Georgia, I think this is the one year that Rick gets over the hump with as far as, losing those big games. I think Georgia's in the Final Four. I think they win the SEC. That's just my opinion. But
that's okay.
Anyway, just wanted to see
you are certainly entitled to it, Rick. Thanks a lot. Good to hear from you.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, no, I mean, Georgia has a pretty tough schedule, I think. Let's check in with Daniel, who is next up in Boston. Hey, Daniel.
Hey, Paul. Second-time call.
Thank you.
First time calling from Boston. I'm like the only college football fan in this entire state.
You're it.
I Ole Miss grad, and I was going to talk to you about the guy that called earlier from Mississippi State, but I wanted to agree with one point that you made. And last year was a really special season for Mississippi native. I think everybody from that state can appreciate that you get some positive press, to kind of do away with some of the negative history and some of the assumptions about that state. So you're quite right, and your point is well taken that the weekend in particular when Ole Miss beat Alabama, and I think State was at Auburn.
Well, no, State had A&M that weekend at home.
Was it A&M? Okay.
Yeah, it was. And both were. A&M was highly regarded coming off of the South Carolina win. They had beaten Arkansas, and obviously it was two top 10 matchups on both sides. And I was struck being in the State that weekend, and then 2 weeks later, and then 6 weeks later, that surprisingly, both sides were really cheering for the other side. Everyone was all in. I had not seen that before in Alabama, between Auburn and Alabama. I did see it with Mississippi State and Ole Miss.
And you're quite right. So that being said, there's still a rivalry there. And what I will say to the guy who is rousing Ole Miss a little bit, saying we haven't won an SEC championship, if you look back at State since the 90s, we're going back to Jackie Sherrill, the program has been in shambles. And they went with Sylvester Crome, and yes, Dan Mullen's doing great things there, but that guy has no room to talk at all. And Ole Miss has been the gold standard, at least in that state, putting up Cotton Bowl wins, putting up bowl game victories. So that there still is a rivalry there. But if I've got time, can I ask you one more quick question? This goes to the point that was made earlier about Georgia. There was a caller that said that divisions don't matter, the Georgia fan. And to that point, if divisions don't matter and the SEC is the strongest conference, why is it that Missouri, who was decent, but they were getting rocked back and forth from either Texas or Oklahoma or K-State, why is it that they can come into the East and win 2 out of 3 years? So if divisions don't matter, and of course Georgia's taking credit for being in the SEC, then why is it that I would say mid-major team from the Big 12 can come in and just throttle the Eastern Division?
This is the best of the Paul Finebaum podcast. ESPN Radio, bringing you directly to the biggest events in sports.
Center field, well hit, Hunter back, out of here!
From opening day of baseball,
throw to the plate, safe at the plate,
right through the World Series.
For the 3rd time in 5 seasons, the San Francisco Giants are the champions of the baseball world.
Whether it's LeBron, Chris Paul, or Kevin Durant, when the NBA tips off, ESPN Radio is right there when a champion is crowned.
We have a new world champion. The San Antonio Spurs are the world champions.
And when the magic of bowl season arrives, ESPN Radio is your home for the new college football playoff.
The college football playoff first national champion, the Ohio State Buckeyes.
The biggest events in sports can be found right here on ESPN Radio. This is the best of the Paul Finebaum podcast.
Matt Hayes, longtime sports writer in Florida, now with the Sporting News, did a ranking of the SEC coaches. We'll try to show it for you in a moment because a lot of folks have reacted to it and have not liked it. Nick Saban, number 1, Steve Spurrier, Brett Bielema, Pinkel, Les Miles, Gus Malzahn, Hugh Freeze, Mark Rick, Sumlin, Butch Jones at 10, Dan Mullen 11, Jim McElwain, Stoops 13, Derek Mason. The Sporting News has done this over the many years. They rank various conferences, do a national one, I think. We'll bring Matt Hayes on. And Matt, it's been way too long, but thanks so much for providing us with great material today. Good afternoon.
How you doing, Paul?
Really well. Thanks a lot for the time. Talk about this poll because I know that the Sporting News has done this for some time, and I know you're very involved. What is the process in terms of conferences, and then isn't there one that you guys do as well for the entire world of college football?
Yeah, there is. I mean, if your listeners are all upset about this one, Paul, I mean, wait till we get a load of Wednesday 1 through 128. That'll be a more pre-summer thought fest for you. So you can thank me later for that one too as well.
Well, let me ask you about the SEC, Matt. I know you've done this for years, and a lot of folks have done polls, and obviously you reach various conclusions. I think most would understand Nick Saban at number 1, and certainly Spurrier at number 2. You're talking about 2 of the Hall of Fame coaches in the sport. After that, though, give us your view because it gets pretty interesting.
Well, you know this as well as anybody. I mean, you've got those 2 there, you know, and I actually believe it's really just 1. And I think from 2 to 11, it's really there's just such a small difference between each level of those coaches. I mean, you look at this league and how tough it is to win. You know, Arkansas lost 5 games by 29 points last year. South Carolina lost 4 by 18. Auburn lost 3 by 17. I mean, those are significant issues right there where, you know, a couple of plays, handful of plays go here or there, it's a different situation right now. And I think a lot of this is based on who you're winning with. Are they elite recruits? Are they not elite recruits? Are you recruiting well? Are you getting the most out of your recruits? Are you developing players? What's the trend line with the coach? Is the program moving upward? Is it stagnant? Has it fallen back? So I think a lot of that gets taken into consideration. And I'm sure one of the ones that jumps out at everybody, or a couple of them, would be 3 and 4, and that's Brett Bielema, Arkansas at 3, and Gary Pinkel, Missouri at 4.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, we could spend the rest of the week on some of these. I mean, Bielema at 3 over a coach with a national championship and Les Miles at 5, and Mark Richt at 8, one of the most successful coaches in modern SEC history. I'll let you explain.
Well, I mean, if you're talking about Les Miles, I'm looking at a guy right now, and believe me, I'm a big Les Miles fan, but I'm looking at a guy right now who's 14-8 in his last 22 games. He's 8-7 in his last 15 SEC games. And the reality is, last year, Paul, it could have been a lot worse for LSU. And I think the previous season wasn't also up to quote-unquote LSU standards. So I think there's definitely some slippage there. And I think if you're talking about Mark Richt, the reality is this. Georgia should have won the East the last 2 years. Georgia had the best talent on the field each of those years. And I think Georgia's lost a little mojo since that championship game loss to Alabama. I think something happened there with them. And you can talk about how stuff like that doesn't make a difference, but it does. I really believe it does. It's all part of the process. So I think those are two big reasons right there. And you look at Gary Pinkel, I mean, come on. Here's a guy who probably definitely recruits in the lower half of the SEC, maybe even lower than that, probably in the 10, 11, 12 area. And he's consistently winning in this league. And we constantly hear arguments about how the SEC is down. Well, I don't care about that. You still got to go out there and win games. It's still a terrific conference week in and week out. You still got teams on the other side of the ball with great players. And Missouri is proving that they can win at this level. This is the team that everybody laughed at when he got in the SEC, and now look at them.
Well, but Ole Miss with Hugh Freeze, 11-13 in 3 years in the SEC, not even 500. They're ranked, and you have Hugh Freeze, who I agree maybe on the cusp of turning this thing around, ranked ahead of Mark Richt. I mean, I realize we can quibble over almost anything and everything, but I do want you to. I thought the Miles explanation was certainly understandable. I mean, he is clearly on the hot seat. He may not even be there next year. But what about Mark Richt?
I just think sometimes in situations with coaches, you get players who start hearing the same message over and over and over. And I think they get in ruts, and programs get in ruts. And you see programs when they're talking about elite games, big games that you've got to have and to rise to the elite level, to become division champs, to become conference champs. That's where you struggle in those games. And I think right now you might be in that position with Mark Richt in Georgia. You got players who are basically hearing the same message over and over and over. And what happens now with Brian Schottenheimer there at offensive coordinator, does it shake up a little bit? Because obviously Schottenheimer will do things differently than Mike Bobo. That's left to see. I think if you look at Hugh Freeze and Ole Miss, a lot of that is based on trending upward. And a lot of that is based on last year. And I really believe that if Laquan Treadwell hadn't got injured in that Auburn game, it's a different story for that team. That they were playing as well as anyone in the country last year.
It's your list. Certainly, I appreciate you answering the questions. Let's get toward the middle to the bottom. You have Sumlin at 9. Certainly, he hasn't done it yet, although much expectations. Butch Jones. Dan Mullen at 11 has received a lot of attention here today. Why?
I think at some point you got to look at totality, and for us looking at that and looking at Mississippi State last year, granted it was a terrific season, the weeks they spent at number 1, but when you start looking back at the season and the teams they beat to get to that point, then you start questioning, all right, well, were they ranked too high? Were they a team that really deserved to be in that spot? And you lose to Ole Miss, you lose to Alabama, and I think the Orange Bowl really kind of brought it all into focus, because if that's a program that is trending positively, you go in that game, that Orange Bowl, and you this is your line. You draw a line in the sand, Paul. This is the big game. You've lost 2 games. You got a little shine off the season after that, big start, and you're number 1. Now you're going into a bowl game. You're playing a Georgia Tech team that's hot. You've got to play well, and they played horribly, Paul. They were dismantled in that game, and I think a lot of that is part of that ranking.
I know you alluded to earlier, Gus Malzahn at 6 also got a few tongues wagging. We all know what he's done. He's coming off of an 8-5 record. And before you even answer, this is a tough league not only to win, but it's also a tough league to advance. So Malzahn at 6. Why?
I mean, Gus is, we started out talking about how 2 through 11 is so tight. I mean, you look at really 3 through 6, and you could throw those guys anywhere. And I really believe what happened with Gus last year, I think he got away from the run too much. I think they had like 120 or 130 less carries than they did the year before. And Artis Payne was running as well as Trey Mason by the end of last season. And I think they just got away from what they were doing well, and obviously defensively they fell apart. And a coach, it's the entire staff. He runs his staff. So, Gus has to be accountable for that defensive coordinator. It's the same thing with Kevin Sumlin. Paul, I think Kevin Sumlin's a terrific coach. But the reality is he has not had a defensive coordinator on that program. They have not played well on defense. He goes out, he gets John Chavis. Now we're going to see what happens with that program. They got a guy who's proven commodity as a coordinator.
How's the internal debate going for the top coach in the country between, I presume, Urban Meyer and Nick Saban?
It's a fun one. Just stay tuned for Wednesday. It's a fun one, I'll tell you that.
We will. Matt, thank you very much. Always good to catch up.
Okay, Paul, my pleasure.
This is the best of the Paul Finebaum podcast.
Carl is in Jackson, Mississippi. Hey, Carl, thank you. Good afternoon.
Paul, enjoy your show. I got one for you, and this is my opinion.
Okay.
Nick Saban is not hungry anymore. I watched that game over there. The quarterbacks are terrible. Jack Prescott, Mississippi State, LSU, you have to watch them. Auburn will beat Alabama this year.
So you're beginning to say you're beginning to play taps for Saban, huh?
When you're making that kind of money, and you can tell it in his walk, he don't have it anymore. He's not hungry. And I don't think that the offensive coordinator is the answer. He's making too much money, too.
Well, let me say this, Carl. Who isn't making too much money right now in college football?
I agree. That guy that went to Texas, I don't think he's worth that kind of money. But
here's the deal, Carl, and I just want to make this pretty clear. Everyone is making a fortune. That's just because the salaries have all escalated. Kevin Sumlin is making more than $5 million a year. He hasn't won a title yet. He hasn't won a division at A&M. Hugh Freeze, Mullen, all these guys are making about $4 right now. That's just because you get paid by what's around you and your competitors. And at some point, this will all work out. I don't know how to answer your question on Saban. Saban, he could have retired 5 years ago, and he would have had a great career. I think he still has a great work ethic and a great desire. His teams haven't exactly faded from memory. 2 years ago, they were number 1 in the country on Thanksgiving weekend. This year, they were number 1 in the country on January 1st. So, and before that, he'd won 2 straight national championships. He missed a year, and he won the previous year. So I'm not sure I follow exactly where you're pointing toward in relation to having lost his passion.
I feel that anything that he's been on the job a while, and he's made a good living. He's done some outstanding things with the kids, but I think it's time for him to think about retiring. I really think it's time. And okay. I appreciate you taking my call. And, Bo, I'll call you back in December on what I just told you about Auburn and Alabama.
Okay,
I
Carl.
will call you.
Listen, I love your passion for the call, but I was just simply stating the obvious on Nick Saban. And the obvious is pretty clear. Since 2008, his second season, Alabama has been ranked number 1 in the country and has been in contention in November every single time. If this year goes haywire, then I could understand your argument. But as of this point in time, it's really hard to buy how you could say Nick Saban has lost his passion. I mean, what have you seen? What have you observed that would indicate that? His team has failed now 2 consecutive years in very big games, but he's still been in contention. Who has done better, I guess, is the question. And maybe Urban Meyer, if he wins another one, you can say he's done better. But other than that, your list is pretty short.
This is the best of the Paul Finebaum podcast.
Let's go to Joe in Houston, and you are next up. Hey, Joe.
How you all today?
Really well, thank you.
Love your show. Your discussion about ranking coaches, sitting here watching that, and the first thing I thought of was the old expression of who does the most with the least talent. And if you use that criteria, how that list might change. And I was going to get your thoughts, thinking in those terms, how would you maybe rearrange some of the list of those names?
Yeah, that's a great question there, because that's really what we're talking about. And I think that was the genesis of this. We were talking about Dan Mullen being ranked 11th, and what he was able to get out of his club last year. Listen, after the second choice with Spurrier, you could literally put 3 or 4 coaches at the number 3 position without any difficulty whatsoever. And meanwhile, we haven't even mentioned Jim McElwain at number 12. I mean, he's just sitting there because there's nowhere for him to go, and he really doesn't have a resume, but he certainly has upward mobility.
All right. And you had a caller earlier discussing about Ole Miss. I tell you what, if Hugh Freeze doesn't get a dual threat quarterback for that spread offense, his ranking may drop even further in that coaching ranking there. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's another question to pose of that list. Who has the most upside, but who could drop? And that's always the risk you're talking about here. I mean, again, these are subjective lists. You have to base them on a number of different criteria. You just can't say, hey, the guy won 12 games last year, he's number 2 on my list. That's not the way to do it. You have to take a deep breath and then move away. But the SEC has, I mean, if you looked at it, how many really above average to not great, because great's an overused phrase, but excellent coaches do you have? And the list is pretty. I mean, I think it'd be harder to find who are the really bad Are there any bad coaches in the SEC? No, there really aren't any bad coaches. There are 1 or 2 or 3 that certainly are you may have a hard time ever getting out of the gate, and I think it's pretty obvious who they are. Let's go to Tom next. Tom in Athens, Alabama. How are you, Tom?
I'm pretty good, Mr. Finebaum. How are you?
Very well.
My question is, I'm a 97 graduate student from the University of Alabama, and I've grown up in the state. I followed Bear Bryant's career. When these people call in from other states and they criticize Nick Saban and say he's lost his fire, I really wish you would take him on, because Bryant won, as you know, 3 national championships in the 60s and 3 in the 70s. And the only thing I see is jealousy from these other states and these other schools. And I really wish you'd take them to task.
Well, Tom, thank you. I mean, I thought I made a pretty reasonable defense of Saban a couple of minutes ago. I think his record is exemplary, and I think it speaks for itself. But thank you very much for your call. Ed is in Georgia. Good afternoon, Ed.
Hey, Mr. Paul Finebaum. How you doing this afternoon?
I'm really well, thank you.
Yes, sir. I just want to talk about the list here. I don't quite see how Malt Rick could be number 8 in this list when you have coaches ahead of him that's not even won an SEC championship. I mean, he's the longest tenured coach in the SEC. He's doing something right. We've not won a national championship.
Hey, by the way, I mean, you've got one way ahead of him who's barely won an SEC game.
Exactly. Thank you. And we went there and stopped them, if I recall correctly. I don't understand the logic there. I got to get this off my chest. I was on hold, and this Larry fellow from Missouri, he's a regular caller. He's not Tony the Tiger. The great's old. Let's get a new routine. And everybody in the Southeastern Conference and who knows football knows that the best team wasn't in Atlanta last year. No question about it. We went up there and destroyed them. Think about that. Great. Anyhow, go Dogs. would like to really try to understand the list a little better. Bye-bye. Great show, Paul.
Thank you very much for the call. I do appreciate it. Let's go to Bob in Norman, Oklahoma. Hey, Bob.
How you doing, Paul?
Really well, thank you.
Hey, Joe from Houston touched on a little bit about what I was going to talk about coaching. You know, I rate coaches that how far they bring a program. It's pretty easy, I think, for a coach to step into a program that's a winning program, a national power, and win. But when you're like, let's say, Bill Snyder, that come into Kansas State. Kansas State didn't win a football game. I think they won 2 or 1 football game in 5 years. And, of course, you know, Bill Snyder's still a good coach. But Gary Patterson and Art Briles, they're about the same situation. And you kind of wonder if some of these bigger-name coaches would be as good if those 2 programs where they started at.
Yeah, that's always difficult to say. I've had this argument with people about Saban before. I mean, he did reasonably well at Michigan State, but you know, he's won titles at LSU and Alabama, which are 2 blue-chip programs. It's hard to find 2 more intense fan bases. Spurrier won at Duke, which is virtually impossible, or we thought it was. David Cutcliffe has won there as well. He won at Florida, which had not won, but everyone always thought would win. And, you know, he had 3 consecutive 11-win seasons at South Carolina, a place that's never won. Those are major accomplishments. But you also have to give coaches credit. Butch Jones, Brett Bielema walked into situations that were in some ways at rock bottom, at least from a psychological standpoint. He has completely and totally changed the culture. I mean, don't forget what James Franklin did at Vanderbilt, the most difficult place to win in the SEC. He went in there, turned the culture around. Vanderbilt was on an amazing roll, and then he left to go to Penn State. Let's grab some more calls. And where am I here? Alex is up next. Alex, thank you for the phone call. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you, sir. I'd like to reply back to the Alabama guy that called in about Saban not losing it. But let's go back and look. They've lost 3 Sugar Bowls. He's been in 3 Sugar Bowls that they've lost.
Okay.
Okay. And
by the way, Alex, don't forget. I mean, he won another game in that same building that counted as a national championship.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'll take that. I mean,
okay.
I'm an Auburn fan, but I think Nick Saban's probably one of the best coaches in football. But they can lose their edge. Let's go to the Iron Bowl. He begged for 1 second, and then he loses the game.
Okay.
And then last year, Ohio State, they play in Ohio State. Derrick Henry was just killing them. They couldn't stop him. The next thing you know, he's on the sideline not getting any plays. And they just completely.
Now, Alex, let me ask you. You said you're an Auburn fan, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, and you're poking holes at a coach who has won 4 national championships.
No, sir, not at all. I'm not.
Well, what is your point? I mean, we all know Alabama has lost a couple of games, not many, but they've lost a few.
Well, I mean, if you just want to, I mean, it just seems like he's not as edgy as he used to be and making some bad calls. I mean, hey, he has been the standard, no doubt. And I'll give him his props all day long. But just bad calls. You know, you cry for a second, you get it, and you lose the game. Derrick Henry on the sideline, why don't you run him down their throat so they can stop him? And he didn't do that. We should, I mean, I got SEC pride. I don't know about
Alex. It seemed like Saban had a pretty good edge in the Iron Bowl this year. He was way down, looked like he was out against Auburn, came back mighty strong in that second half, didn't he?
Oh yeah, no doubt, not at all. I mean,
no doubt. No, there is no doubt about that. And if you want to say Saban's lost his edge, let's wait and see what happens this year. I think he has something to prove, and if this season goes down in smoke, then this is a fair argument. But right now, I think it's a tad premature.
Thank you for listening to the best of the Paul Finebaum podcast. Tune into the Paul Finebaum Show every day from 3 to 7 Eastern on the SEC Network or on the ESPN Radio app. The Texas Rangers into the the Bronx to face Alex Rodriguez, Mark Teixeira, and the Yankees. The pregame's at 7 Eastern, followed by first pitch at 8, Sunday on ESPN and on ESPN Radio.